Hello and welcome to another How to Build guide from Hollywood Wargaming. And today we are going to be looking at how to build early to mid-war Germans from your basic Warlord infantry box sets. And this will serve as a guide on how to build German infantry units with relative historical accuracy in relation to the kits that Warlord Game supplies you and the rules for bolt action from the time period that exists from about 1939, although probably more appropriately 1940 with the invasion of France, up until late 1942. So this guide will pertain to things such as the Blitzkrieg, Afrika Korps, and Operation Barbarossa. And that means you will be missing out on a lot of the late war German toys, such as Panzerfaust and assault rifles, but that's no big deal if you're playing opponents who are also playing similar time periods. It's a bit of an uphill battle when you're facing other late war armies, but if you guys are abiding to the same rules, say Afrika Korps versus Desert Foxes, I do find that early to mid-war era to be very fun on the tabletop. There's just overall less extremes in between point cost and damage values and trying to get penetrations in on vehicles that makes the game feel a little bit more rewarding and not hinge on a few lucky dice rolls for very points heavy units. But it's also going to mean that your units are going to be relatively easier to build out of the box. And in all fairness, this video isn't going to be too different from my How to Build the British Infantry guide, as that video does kind of serve as a very basic template on how to build these infantry units for bolt action. But with no further ado, let's jump into it. And the first thing I want to talk about here is the buzzsaw keyword that the Germans have for a national characteristic. That means all of your LMGs and MMGs are going to be receiving one extra die or an extra shot when they fire in combat. And that alone is automatically going to have you incentivize those MG34s and MG42s in your German infantry squads. And while that can be a bit of a point sink sometimes, it can make for some very powerful long-ranged units. The Germans also went into the Second World War with the MP40, meaning that Germans have a relatively fluid access to fielding their infantry with submachine guns. So both LMGs and SMGs are going to be valuable pieces of your sprues that you are going to want to pluck out and hold on to, as you will likely be making good use of them. But much like the last British video, we are going to have two ways to build these box sets, and these two avenues of approach are basically going to rely on whether you want to buy those support groups or extra blister packs to get your command and support units in there, or whether you just want to build them out of plastic from this box set. Keep in mind, every reinforced platoon does need an HQ option, and you can build that commander by either getting one of these box sets and making one of the models an officer with a peaked cap, or you can alternatively go out and buy some of the HQ blister packs that they have, which are often metal models, which I know some people have aversions to, but they also have a lot of character to them, so it really does come down to personal preference. But let's go ahead and take a look at our first build option here, and this is going to be if you just want to build 3 raw infantry squads. No support units and no commanders. And here we are going to have the German 10-man squad with an NCO sporting that submachine gun, followed up by 2 light machine guns, who are in turn accompanied by 2 loaders, and then 5 regular riflemen. Now, generally speaking, if you're going off the core rulebook list or the Armies of Germany units, the only unit that's going to be able to field 2 LMGs in a squad is going to be your veteran grenadiers. However, veteran grenadiers are going to be your bread and butter for most German armies, and there are several other reasons to invest in building these MG34 models. The first being that you can take one of these LMGs and 2 loaders and just field them on their own as an MMG squad. There is no actual difference between an MMG and an LMG in bolt action. They are always either MG42s or MG34s for the Germans. And the idea is that having the extra loader and something like a bipod to mount them on makes them able to crank out more shots, and that's why they get the extra dice. On top of that, we are seeing a lot more early war campaign rulebooks that do allow for special units in the game, most notably the Schützen for the Afrika Korps in the Western Desert book. These guys are allowed to take 1 free LMG per squad, and you are an absolute madman if you do not take advantage of that. So if you do plan on playing a very specific campaign on a very specific theater, I would say look into it and see what options you have when it comes to equipping your infantry. And there will be some early war scenarios where you are not allowed to take 2 LMGs in a squad, and if that is the case, I would say maybe drop one of the LMGs. They really can be somewhat of a point sink, and you don't always have to be running 2 of them per squad just to get those extra dice. But if this is your first box and your first German army, I would say it is a solid investment. And of course, you are going to be modeling 2 loaders with them, and usually with loaders, you're just going to make a rifleman with either some bullets slung around his neck or carrying an ammo case. And for the most part, those guys can be used as regular riflemen if you don't want to fill the LMGs. And you can even do something as simple as just modeling a rifleman kneeling to signify that he's a loader. After that, we are going to have those 5 riflemen, of course. These are basic riflemen. You can model them with grenades if you want. Grenades don't really signify anything in bolt action. Some people use them to signify vehicle assault squadrons, but that's more of a Soviet thing with their Molotov cocktails. As far as most other factions go, don't worry about it. If you want them holding grenades for some dynamic posing, go ahead and do it. It doesn't make a difference. But then we are going to have the NCO with a submachine gun. And submachine guns are really fantastic in bolt action. And if your faction has access to them, I would definitely recommend utilizing them. However, I will say there is a little bit of conflict between your meta play, between having a squad with a submachine gun and LMGs. The submachine gun is very close quarters and assault oriented, while the LMG does very well at long range and can kite enemy firepower quite well just by sitting out of their range. And there are many games where I take dual LMG squads with a rifleman for their NCO, and there are many games where I take veterans that just have up to 6 submachine guns in them. However, if you're just getting into the game, this is a very take-all-comers build, and there absolutely will be scenarios where you're going to benefit from having the extra shots from both the submachine gun and the LMGs. So going with this build for your basic infantry squad is going to serve you quite well, and it's going to give you a nice toolbox of models in which you can build units from, be it regular hero infantry squads or veteran grenadiers. Also, it's worth noting that if you are doing something like Afrika Korps or perhaps Stalingrad Germans, you could go with either the MG34 or MG42. A lot of those mid-war German factions did end up using those before things like the Panzerfaust or assault rifle came in. So don't feel like you need to hunt down MG34s if you want to do kit bashing or anything like that. But let's say you want to go ahead and build an HQ and some support units out of this box set. That's going to move us along to our next build suggestion, and here you're basically going to see 2 clones of the previous entry, being that NCO with a submachine gun, followed up by 5 riflemen, 2 LMGs, and 2 more loaders. Again, you will be building that squad twice, and if you do field those 2 squads as veteran grenadiers, you are going to have a nice hardy backbone to your infantry force. If you throw these guys in cover and engage your enemies at about 30 inches with those 2 LMGs rattling away every turn, it can actually be a very impressive and imposing amount of firepower, one that the enemy will struggle to respond to. And that is going to leave us with 10 infantry models still, in which we can build a commander and some support units and then some extra guys. So let's go ahead and look at this HQ. Now here you're going to have 3 models representing the commanding officer and his 2 cronies who go along with him. Now these guys can equip whatever weapons they want for free, so why not get the SMGs, throw them in there, and you have 3 models putting out 6 shots and having 3 attacks with tough fighters in close combat. It's a pretty impressive little powerhouse who can pull off some clutch moves late game, so long as you preserve them properly. Now, as far as modeling your commanding officer himself goes, I would go ahead and just use the peaked cap on him. Almost every infantry sprue comes with a peaked cap head. I wouldn't use that on the NCOs, as squad leaders really wouldn't be wearing something like that in real life combats, and it's nice to have your commanders stand out like that. Now, I also know it's very tempting to model your officer with a Luger. It's iconic, and it's very cool looking even in 28mm, but pistols aren't great in bolt action. There's not really any reason to take them over a submachine gun. But if you're mostly playing casual games, you can throw the pistol on him, and maybe throw a submachine gun on his back if you have the extra bits, and just say he's wielding an SMG. I do it almost every game, my friends have no problem with it, just food for thought. But next, we are going to have our support team option here, and this is where things get a little bit interesting, because a lot of these different early war box sets have different options here. But broadly speaking, we're going to make this a quote-unquote marksman team. And that is going to include a rifleman with a special rifle, followed up by a spotter who can either be a regular rifleman or perhaps a rifleman in prone holding binoculars who can double as a spotter or air observer if you'd like. Now, if you have something like the Blitzkrieg box sets, this quote-unquote special rifle is going to be a Kar 98 with a scope, which of course will make this a sniper special team in your reinforced platoon. But if you have something like the Afrika Korps box set, you're going to go ahead and make the Panzer Bukes anti-tank rifle. And while anti-tank rifles might not be the most impressive weapon in bolt action or the hardest anti-tank counter, they are very inexpensive and will give you another activation dice for very, very cheap at just 35 points for a regular model. They are also a genuine threat to light armored cars and transports and soft-skinned vehicles. So if you're going early mid-war, it very much is advisable to go ahead and build yourself an anti-tank rifle just to have in your collection should you need it. Even if you don't use him, it's only going to be one prone model that you're not going to be using, and the spotter you make alongside him can be used as either an air observer or a spotter for something like a mortar. But that is going to leave us with 5 extra models, and for these ones, I highly recommend you just make some extra auxiliary models so you can further tweak your basic infantry squads to your liking. And in the video, I have this pictured as 3 submachine guns and 2 riflemen, although I think maybe I would advise going with 3 riflemen and 2 submachine guns, as that third crony in your HQ may be left out to give your HQ the small team bonus, and that would give you 3 extra submachine guns and 3 extra riflemen. And those submachine guns can be thrown into your grenadier squads in case you wish to make them more assault-oriented, while those riflemen will be the flip side of the coin and can replace either your submachine gun NCOs or your second LMG to save points in your basic infantry builds. Alternatively, you could field this as their own 5-man squad, in which I would recommend emphasizing SMGs and perhaps throwing them in a transport such as an SDKFC 250. All are viable options, and in the end, it's just going to give you extra tools to work with when it comes to list building. Now, it is also worth mentioning that the Afrika Korps box set does come with that German early war light mortar, and if you're a bit of a completionist, you could go ahead and build one of those in lieu of perhaps a rifleman or a submachine gun. But if you're strapped for cash and really need to go for bang for your buck out of a 30-man box, I would say ignore that, as they aren't very good in bolt action anyways. But that is my overall recommendation on how to build a 30-man plastic box set of early to mid-war German infantry from Warlord Games. As some of you more experienced players may notice, it's a lot simpler than some of the later build options that we're going to take a look at. Things get a lot more complex when you start throwing in stuff like Fallschirmjäger with the FG-42s, or Grenadiers, or Volkssturm. But we will be taking a look at that down the road, and if you guys want to see more videos like this, go ahead, hit subscribe, consider turning on notifications, leaving a like, and until next time guys, as always, take care.